confidence. So you're able to kind of exert some sense of real confidence inside of you and not fake it. Because if you fake it, the person can read that. So CPR and first aid, great to know that. It also helps the person feel good knowing that if something happens, their body's protected. Because when you're in the higher doses of psychedelics and you're dissociating a bit from the physical body, people are afraid to let go. And I know personally, if I'm entering one of those states, the feeling of I hope that I'm protected by the environment and people around me is one of the overbearing thoughts and fears. And that goes through a lot of people's minds. Especially as a paramedic, I can tell you, as people are going unconscious in an ambulance, one of the biggest things that they're concerned about is what's going to happen if I go out, if I lose control of my body. So just having a CPR first aid training, it allows them to have that understanding that you know when to call an ambulance if needed. Mental health first aid, that's really good for when somebody enters a struggle, knowing how to go through certain steps on how to de-escalate them. Suicide intervention training is widely available now, crisis intervention. And then there's also something called the Navigating Psychedelics course. That's a really good one for people who are really new to psychedelics or you want to learn a lot more about it. There's, if you've ever heard of Psychedelics Today, they're a really good organization that's been around for a while now out of Colorado, and they want to empower people, the average person, with the knowledge and understanding on how to use psychedelics and understand the psychedelic experience. So taking that online course, there is a fee for it. I'm not sure how much it is now. I think it's around $120, but it really does help for people who want to get right into the nitty gritty of psychedelics. But there's a lot of different courses out there. Also meditation and mindfulness. The reason why that's out there is that you as a trip sitter have to be able to recognize your own triggers and your own biases, and also maybe help somebody, arm them with tools so that if they need to use some type of mindfulness or breathing techniques to move through a very difficult experience, you can help guide them with that, because a lot of people don't come into the psychedelic space with those tools. I'm just going to keep an eye here on the chat. Okay, cool. Yeah, so the chat's open if people have questions, but now we got that kind of what is an effective trip sitter and some helpful courses you can take going in. I think any type of spiritual training, mental health training, or medical training is definitely helpful for these spaces. Let me see here. The drug chart, I think, is a big one we're going to go into in a moment for people who aren't familiar with how different drugs interact with each other. But let's first talk about how psychedelics work in the brain. A lot of people do understand that now because the research is a lot more mainstream, but I think it can be gone into a little bit better. Okay, so if you can see the screen here, this is just a quick slide. Like I said, I'm not going to depend on a slideshow for this. There's just a couple important slides that help from current slide. There we go. So psychedelics can interact with certain medications. So if you're a trip sitter, there's two types of trip sitters. There's planned trip sitters, where you're expecting to go into the experience with friends or family or whoever. Or maybe there's unexpected trip sitters, where maybe you're at a party, you're at a music festival, you're out in public, and someone happens upon you having a difficult experience. If you're planning an experience, it's much easier to avoid the pitfalls and to understand how to support somebody. So let's go with that. If you know somebody's on certain medications, heart pills, medications like MAOIs, which are a certain class of antidepressants, they can sometimes make a psychedelic experience a lot more overwhelming. SSRIs, which are selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, they're not shown to be as harmful per se, but use caution. They can sometimes blunt the experience. But if the person's never used psychedelics with those medications before, definitely encourage caution with that. I'd say any medications, see if you can look for the interactions between those drugs. We're going to look on the next page on how certain things interact. But definitely MAOIs, pay attention to those, antipsychotics. And anytime someone has like a serious heart condition, stressing out the mind and body in general is usually something to take with extreme caution. Now, they usually work in the 5-HT2A and S2 pathways, depending which one it is. There's a different release of serotonin, norepinephrine, and oxytocin, and dopamine. And that causes different physical sensations, and that's related to the emotional association. So let's stop sharing the screen here, because I don't want to keep too much in the PowerPoint. So when we take psychedelics, the way that it changes our brain activity It quiets down certain brain regions, and it also increases connectivity between different brain regions as well. And that can bring on certain physical sensations. And sometimes that can actually be from a traumatic experience we've had, or it can be an association to an emotion like anger or sadness or hopelessness. So recognizing that if somebody is feeling an overwhelming emotion or physical sensation while on a psychedelic, that can be normal. And there's not actually reason to panic from that. And encourage that person to do some research on the drug that they're going to actually embark on. MDMA is a little different. So psilocybin today is National Mushroom Day globally, so that's wonderful. And I think it's important to know that psilocybin is one of the safer compounds when it comes to these psychedelic experiences, whether it's recreationally or medicinally. And that's because they're very well researched and there's a lot less physical side effects with them. MDMA, the only reason why I usually would give people caution with it is that it's very difficult to find a pure substance. So being able to test drugs or recommend somebody test their drugs is very important. And I'll share resources at the end of this for how someone can get their hand on reagent kits to test for adulterants that are negative. Because pure MDMA itself, it may not be exactly the same as LSD and psilocybin, but it's a lot more of an entactogen. It's a lot more of a, it's not a speed type of drug. It's hard to exactly explain this to a lay person, but if somebody's taking MDMA and they're feeling speedy and they're like grinding their jaw and their heart rate's really high and they're feeling really stimulated nervous system wise, almost like they're, had too much coffee or something, well, chances are that's not MDMA. And a lot of people think they've taken MDMA, but really they've taken amphetamines, or they've taken MDMA laced with amphetamines. So, testing your drugs is extremely important, especially with LSD. There's a couple different classes of research chemicals that can be really hard on the body if you don't know what you're doing. So definitely take your time to test substances if you don't know your source. Also, how do psychedelics work on changing brain function? They make the brain neuroplastic. So there's an ability to adapt to emotional reactions. Rigid perspectives may open up, which is a good thing. People have room to grow. And this is where being a good trip sitter, it's not about guiding the person, but sort of being an open space holder where you can reflect to them some of the changes that are happening. Your job's not to actually tell them how to react, but to kind of coach them on how to handle these different changes. So potentially working through trauma. So what'll happen is if trauma comes up, it doesn't mean the psychedelic's just going to cure it. It means that the person needs to be able to integrate it in a certain way that's safe for them and that they're ready and comfortable to do. This doesn't mean that if I have a flashback from a traumatic call I did as a paramedic, you encourage me to, purge it out and talk about it and work through it. I may not be ready for that. The best thing to do is to be open with that person and ask them what they feel they're ready to do. Whether it means they have to try to move away from it and ground themselves again, or if they are ready to sort of bring it out and work through it. Also, the certain brain regions that are involved in sense of self, sensory and communication, relationships and pattern recognition. This is where being a good trip sitter, you want to remember this certain phrase, nothing is weird. Another one to remember is you're not going crazy. Another one is this will all end eventually within a few hours. Because a lot of people, because they can't articulate their speech, they sometimes behave in ways that they're not sure why, or they feel kind of inhibited about. Sometimes they have to move physically in certain ways, or they want to dance, they want to stretch, they want to try to say a certain phrase to you, but it comes out all jumbled. As a good trip sitter, you don't want the person to feel weird. You want to reflect to them that the way they're behaving is normal, because psychedelics do sort of cross different connections. So we have our default mode network you've all heard of before. That's something where when that quiets down, that's a super highway where all of our sensory input comes together. And if that's quieted down, the brain connections and different pathways are going to cross over into different detour routes. And when that person's experiencing reality through different pathways, sometimes it can be quite, you can feel almost not embarrassed, but almost judged. And you almost feel very insecure. That's the word I'm looking for. So when someone's feeling insecure, as a good trip sitter, you want to reflect to them that the way that they're behaving is normal, and it's a normal reaction to the experience. Now, one last thing about safety here is the drug combinations chart, which is going to be part of the PDF I make available. I'm just going to quickly share that screen here. This is from TripSit. So people might actually have seen this before if you're really big at harm reduction. And there we go. So it's hard to see on the screen, but I'm just going to summarize quickly what it says. You can look this up on Google. It's available. The TripSit Guide to Drug Combinations. LSD and magic mushrooms, DMT, mescaline, all the way over to things like DXM, amphetamines, cocaine, caffeine, alcohol. It tells you how they all kind of interact. And at the top right, you'll see a guide where it shows low risk or synergy, meaning that if you combine these drugs, there's very little risk, and sometimes the effects are enhanced together. You might see one of the ones I want you to pay attention to are the caution signs. It doesn't mean for sure using those two drugs together are going to cause danger, but it means to do some research and really look at how those drugs interact. For example, cannabis has a lot of caution signs besides psychedelics. It doesn't mean you can't use cannabis while you're on psychedelics. But what it does mean is that maybe if you're someone who doesn't respond well to it, maybe lay off of it during a psychedelic experience and only use it if you have a good relationship with it. Then, of course, pay attention to the unsafe and dangerous, those orange and red boxes. When the certain drugs line up in those boxes, there's usually evidence that they cause probably issues with blood pressure, heart rate, breathing problems. For example, opioids and alcohol, you never want to mix those. GHB and opioids is another one where if you mix them, there's a lot of chance of people stopping breathing or having difficulty breathing. But I've heard of people doing things like candy flipping, you may have heard of, like MDMA and LSD. So like, let's quickly look at those two. MDMA. It's actually probably hard for people to see this on here. I'll definitely share this with all of you because I can see it's probably small on your screens. So I'll actually wait and share it with you. Oops, I'm going too fast here. One thing to see here quickly is another picture I want you to look at is the hierarchy of human needs. If somebody's about to embark on a psychedelic experience, a good trip sitter is going to talk to the person about their regular day life first. Are they ready for a major psychedelic experience? Are they in a situation where they're having trouble paying rent, where they might lose their home? Are they in a situation where they might lose their job? Are they physically unhealthy, dealing with a medical problem? Are they eating properly? Are they hydrated? You know, they need all these needs met first before embarking on a psychedelic experience. Otherwise, you're unable to process overwhelming emotions. Safety needs. Are they comforted? Are they feeling like their shelter is stable? Are they feeling like they're not being threatened in their daily life? Do they have control in their daily routines? And are they feeling supported? Once those needs are met, then maybe they're a little more likely to experience psychedelics with more safety and less chance of a difficult experience. Social needs. Are they feeling supported in their daily life, their family and friends, like their workplace? Are they feeling actually like those needs are met? Relationships. Do they have a boyfriend, girlfriend, partner, whoever, a spouse, relationship with family members, close people in their life? Are those relationships good, or are they feeling stressed out about those relationships? And if so, have a chat about that. Their affiliation and sense of belonging in their community. When somebody has their biological needs met, their safety needs met, they're feeling socially connected, that's where a psychedelic experience is going to be a lot more beneficial. And as a trip sitter, it's going to be a lot easier to avoid them going into a spiral of a difficult experience. And the top two there we're not going to worry about because self-esteem and self-actualization, sometimes you need the psychedelics for that for certain people. But if they're already at that point, then they should have a much easier time handling adversity and any challenging experiences that come up. So I'm going to stop the share there. Okay, good. So are there any questions so far about preparing to make sure you're assessing for risk in the person who's about to go on a psychedelic experience? I don't want to go too deep into that. I just want to see there if anyone does have any questions on it. Because a lot of people, they want to jump right into the experience itself. But sometimes it's important to make sure someone doesn't have any major medical issues. They're not dealing with any major mental health struggles or crises immediately, and that they have a sense of stability in their immediate life. That helps a lot with the person not going into an inconsolable crisis. But yep, you can always just ask some questions there in the chat. The next thing I really want you to pay attention to is yourself as a trip sitter. Being an effective trip sitter, you yourself have to be in a good state of mind and body. If you're feeling stressed out or you have a lot of triggers that are active in your life, when you're seeing somebody in emotional distress or going through a difficult experience, it's harder to be there for them and to worry about it as their emergency. Sometimes you might turn it around to yourself, or you find it hard to be truly present for them. I find this at my workplace sometimes. If I'm really burnt out and I'm going into the safe injection site, if a client is on a certain substance that is usually a stimulant and they're lacking sleep, or they're, coming out of an overdose, sometimes they'll say things to me like, "You seem off today. Like, are you okay?" And I'm supposed to be caring for them, but they're asking me if I'm okay. And as a trip sitter with psychedelics, you don't really want that situation where they're worried about you. And you might say to them things like, "No, no, 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 I'm all good. I'm all good." But they actually might, um, see through that. Oh, we have a question here. How do you manage rapport if there are risk factors, but the person wants to proceed? Okay. So there is some major risk factor, let's say, and it says specifically, how do you avoid making them feel judged for that? Okay, this is big. So somebody maybe wants you to sit with them during a psychedelic experience. You talk to them about, their history and their situation, and it does come up that there's a risk factor. And we don't have to say which one, but maybe they have a history of psychosis that was an emergency, not some. And by the way, I want to differentiate psychosis versus someone living in altered states or living with the ability to hear voices and things like that. What we look at with mental health disorders is when you're having symptoms of a disorder and it's affecting your ability to live your life and cope with challenges. So maybe this person says they went through a psychosis and ended up in the emergency room. Okay, that's one where it's a risk factor you want to be careful of. Maybe they say, "I have a heart problem." Okay, but you maybe caution them, as a good trip sitter would, like I would at the injection site. If someone says, "I just got out of prison and I haven't used fentanyl in months, and now I'm going to do like a huge 5-point smash." Oh boy. For those of you who don't understand fentanyl, tolerance resets really quickly. And that person who might have a really big tolerance months earlier might now be back to zero. I might tell that person, "Look, if you do that much, you're very likely to overdose." And they might say to me, "F off." I don't know if I'm allowed to swear here, so I'm going to try to keep it clean. Or, "Go F yourself," or one of those statements that people like to say when they're angry. And what I do is I just say to them, "Okay, no problem. My job is not to tell you how to live your life." And that's actually a good point there for this question is you're not going to tell them not to do it if they're already going to do it. You're going to say, "Okay, how can I be here for you? Here are my concerns." And when it comes to psychedelics and you're not actually licensed to be doing this because it's more of an illicit substance, especially if they're just going to do it anyways, arm them with a plan. So if you yourself are comfortable doing it with them, it's okay to have boundaries. Maybe refer them to somebody else there that can do it, but come up with a plan if you're going to be the one to do it. For example, "All right, but if you go unconscious or a medical problem comes up, I'm going to call an ambulance." Okay. Make a deal with them and a safety plan that you can collaborate on. But if they're being unreasonable to you and saying, "No, I'm just going to take them and whatever happens, you're not going to call an ambulance. You're just going to hold my hand and let me go through it. Even if I pass out," it's like, look, if you're being unreasonable, you're being unreasonable. And just tell the person about your comfortability and your boundaries. But if they're adamant on doing it, build a safety plan. So let's go back to the guy doing the fentanyl at my injection site. That's the worst case scenario, right? Like in this situation here, it might just be someone wanting to do psilocybin or, LSD that's pure and it's less likely to have adversity. But this guy doing fentanyl, and this has happened a handful of times, who I say, "Don't do that much. You just got out of prison. You've been away from it for months. You're going to relapse." And they go, "Screw you, I'm doing it." And I go, "Okay, no problem." And when they go to inject and they ask me like why I'm watching them, I just say, "Here's the deal. I'm going to let you do this because you're adamant you're going to do it, but I'm going to pull the oxygen tank close. I'm going to put my gloves on and I'm going to prepare to respond to you." And that's it. I'm going to tell them the truth. I'm not going to say, "Yeah, go ahead. I won't even look at you." No, that's crap. As my job here in this room as a harm reduction worker or you as a trip sitter is to make sure you're safe. So here's the plan. So when that person injects and they overdose and they wake up to me breathing for them and maybe some Narcan, I've warned them ahead of time of what I'm going to do if there's an emergency. So that's a great question. And I actually do have a really good point about that later on where I say, make a safety plan. So thanks for that. If somebody wants to do it anyways, build rapport with some being empathetic that, hey, look, I understand this experience is important to you. It sounds like it's very important to you. Here, the only reason I'm concerned is because I want your well-being to be, at the forefront. But if you're going to do it, here is our plan. So that's a very good question, actually. Another thing too is I want you to make sure that part of building good rapport is taking care of yourself. If you yourself are burnt out and distressed, you're not going to be a good trip sitter and be able to have those difficult conversations. So make sure you have the question. And here's a good thing. If there's a physical issue with somebody, like a medical concern, come up with something called a sample. A sample is an acronym we use in paramedicine and in first aid, where you want to get a bit of medical history in case there is an emergency. So just to kind of another way to tie up that question there is ask them, fine, what are your medical conditions? What are your allergies? Because if I have to call an ambulance, I want to know the important details to tell the paramedics. Because what paramedics need to know when they arrive, and they need to know what's the circumstance of why they're there, and are there any medical conditions this person has that they need to know about. That's major. So part of that rapport is saying to the person, here's where my concerns lie, and here's how we can collaborate on making this safer. So that's really good. What's next here? I'm going to move away from I'm in the PowerPoint. You're going to see a section. I won't go into it because I don't want to waste too much time on the preparing yourself as a trip sitter with self-care, because that's something you all have your own self-care routines, but make sure you're not in distress or you're in a state of almost dysfunction in your life. Like if you're burnt out and someone says, can you sit with me while I take mushrooms? Probably take a step back and take a break and say, not right now. Let's talk about it in a couple of weeks. Never just push yourself to do something to hold space for somebody who might enter a crisis when you're not really there with your resources. So make sure you're in a state of eustress, we say, which is radical acceptance, the ability to roll, with stress as it comes at you. So you're motivated, you feel your cognitive flow, and you feel your optimal potential. Because in a psychedelic experience, yes, most of them go fairly well. And most of the time when there's discomfort, it's just transient in a couple hours. But when there's a really difficult experience, you want to be at your best to reflect to that person that sense of control and safety so they can feel it deep down and move through it. If you're burnt out or you're in a state of anxiety, it's going to reflect onto them and they're not going to receive you well. That's going to make it worse. Preparing the set. Let's get through this part. This is really good. I'm going to throw this on the screen here. This is one second here. I'm going to share this. So set and setting, you hear about this a lot. So we talked about preparing yourself a bit, and you're going to see in the PDF a whole bunch of slides on how to make sure you're prepared to sit for somebody, but take care of yourself. Preparing set, this is really big. So from current slide, hopefully you can all see this. So these are some things we came up with together. A friend of mine named Tina from Trip Project here in Toronto, we came up with this together a couple of years ago. So preparing a safe set. Set is mindset. So for you and the person going through the experience. So it doesn't mean they have to have a real intention. I think that's something to be said. You don't have to have a full intention for the experience. Like, I want to connect with my family better, or I want to heal my depression, or I want to be better socially. You don't need that. A person can really just want to take psychedelics to experience them. But it's suggested that you have one sitter, maybe, if the person's experienced, or two if the person's not comfortable or experienced. Why two? Because holding space for somebody with two people, it's much easier. And there's a couple of reasons for that. If any of you listening here have ever helped somebody in crisis, or actually sat with somebody who went through a difficult psychedelic experience, if you're alone, your brain scrambles more because you realize that you're the only one with the resources and you can run out of them. But if there's another person there, you can have a bit of a protocol together and bounce ideas off each other and take the load off. So if you're getting burnt out or worked up or triggered, you can take a step back and allow that other person to step in. This is one thing I saw a lot when I worked as a paramedic. That's why there's two of us. That when one of us is getting overwhelmed or burnt out, we can kind of trade out a bit and we can work together. It doesn't have to be a male and a female. I know a lot of the times in the research, and it is true, the energies of male and female do line up fairly well, but it could just be two people that know each other and are comfortable working together. That's the key factor. The two sitters, if it's more than one, should be comfortable together and not have any animosity that's hidden, because that will come out to the person you're sitting for. Okay, so when I'm at my work right now and we respond to an overdose, when the person comes out of an overdose, usually they're fairly distressed because they have just basically died almost. And now they're alive and they realize that that doesn't just end today. They're going to probably go through a lot more months of trying to figure out how to get better. And they might overdose again. So all that's going through their mind. So luckily, if I have a partner with me who responded to that overdose, we can both sit there and sort of talk to that person, take turns taking vital signs. The other one talks to them while the other one assesses them. And that way we balance that energy and we don't burn each other out. Spend time, maybe hours or days, priming the occasion. So that's a big one. The goal of the trip, I know you might not want a goal of the trip, that's fine, but just kind of talk about some game plans. What happens if I hit a difficult moment? What are some things going on in my life right now that are bothering me, that I feel out of control with? And what are some things in my life that I'm really looking forward to and I really want to improve maybe or grow through? Are there any big decisions coming up? Relationship problems, that's big. Journaling is really good. So days before, encourage that person you want to sit with to journal, do some creative expression, to meditate and think about what's going on in their life that might come up. Because psychedelics tend to go fairly deep sometimes, deeper than you'd think. Sometimes a childhood memory can come up that you completely forgot about. Sometimes it could be a relationship problem you didn't even think you really had, or a big life change that you have to make that you weren't prepared for. So make sure that person sits and really works through in multiple ways what's going on in their life. Getting grounded is big. So make sure before the experience, go for a walk in nature, get grounded in the setting of where you're going to be, because it allows the mind to kind of adapt and sort of become comfortable towards the environment. You want to get familiar, because in psychedelics, it's already a very unfamiliar experience for many people. And the deeper you go, the more unfamiliar and weird and strange it becomes. So if you can get really grounded in your environment, it's a better tool for when you start to become escalated, or if the person starts to go through a difficult experience, to ground back into it. Spend some time helping them get to know their environment. If you're at a park, go for a nice walk around. If you're in someone's home, make sure they know where the bathrooms are. Make sure you know where the food is. Make sure everyone's aware of where things are, that everyone's familiar. Get grounded. That could also be getting grounded with deep breathing exercises. Maybe you do some stretching, whatever it is that helps. Talk about it with those you trust. So if the experience is coming up, have a big discussion with people you really trust about it. People who aren't going to judge you, and people who are going to be excited for you having this experience. Don't talk to people who are going to be negative and toxic and kind of put horrible ideas in your head. Like, unless it's some people who have good intentions, like maybe you do have a medical problem, but people who don't understand psychedelics, do not talk to them about this stuff. Talk to the people who understand and do some research. I think it's very powerful to do research and actually get to know the substance you're taking and get to know what to expect. Because when you know what to expect, it's a lot less overwhelming. Make sure you're both well rested, nourished, and hydrated, and feeling healthy. However that may be. I'm not going to tell you what diets work. There's a lot of different people who have their opinions on that. Eat and drink and sleep for your body. That's all I'm going to say. Do what works for your body, because the truth is, unfortunately, we're all different. So what works for you may not work for somebody else. So don't make somebody do what works for you. Encourage them to do what they know makes them feel healthy and makes them feel prepared for challenges, so they can work up towards this the days before. Address essential physical, mental, social, and emotional aspects of well-being. That's huge. Make sure that their physical well-being is addressed, that they're going to have blankets for warmth, pillows and cushions for comfort if they go through distress. Mentally, there's things they can do to creatively express themselves. Maybe there's, colorful paintings. Maybe there's coloring books. Things they can do mentally to ground themselves and comfort themselves. Socially, make sure that they've called anybody that they want to talk to before the experience. Maybe they have a partner that they want to say that they love, or call their mom or dad first, or a friend, and discuss stuff with them before. I think it's very important to get off a lot of the emotional baggage we're carrying into this. And then any other aspects of well-being, emotionally or spiritually. Discuss these things and address them before. And then build a trusting and open relationship with a sitter, between the sitter and the tripper. That's huge. So I'm going to stop the share there. So the big thing about building the trust and rapport, I think that's another part of Carolyn's question there that was brought up is the trust and rapport is super important, and that can take days. Unfortunately, sometimes in my job, I have to do it within minutes or seconds with somebody. But how do you build trust and rapport the most is neutrality, I think. Neutrality, being open-minded, and being compassionate. And if you can reflect that to somebody that you're neutral to what they're going through, and when I say neutral, I don't mean emotionally neutral. I don't mean like, I don't care. I mean like neutral in the sense of life happens, experiences happen, whatever you're going through, it's happening. Yep. Let's radically accept it. It's happening. But you're showing compassion as well. So when I respond to somebody who's had an overdose out in the park, or someone who's in crisis from being on a substance, who's out in Moss Park in downtown Toronto, or, you know, on the side of the street near one of my injection sites I work at. Sometimes people are on psychedelics, or sometimes they're in a psychosis or in an altered state, and I'm responding to them and meeting them for the first time. So when I get to them, I don't run up and try to control the situation. I say, hey, it looks like you're having some distress. How can I help you? Is there anything I can do for you? Meet them at the level that they're at, and that's huge. Showing neutrality. Don't act as if they're in distress. Like, don't show it in your face. Don't react physically to how the person's presenting. If somebody is like throwing their hands around, you know, they're walking back and forth, they have a lot of energy they're presenting, and they're showing that they're very, you know, expressive in the way they're moving, don't react startled and scared and kind of like this and defensive. That's going to provoke somebody to get worse. A lot of building trust and rapport with someone as they enter the psychedelic experience is nonverbal cues. How do you sit and position yourself comfortably? Don't look like you're someone who's on edge or you're expecting something bad to happen. Because I've seen early in my paramedic career, when I worked with people in altered states, when I was young, nervous, it was my first few times dealing with somebody who was really not grounded in this reality, and they're maybe scared and paranoid, and they can see that concern in my face and that look of my body of, you know, don't hurt me, and I'm kind of showing defensive language. Well, that escalates people a lot more, because it kind of shows them, look, I have a reason not to trust you. Look, you're showing you have something to hide. I've found now, like 8 years into healthcare, after the years of being a paramedic and now an addictions mental health worker, seeing people sometimes who are escalated on crystal meth, who've been up for days and days. And I use that example quite often here. Someone who's on a stimulant that's extremely potent, that's been not sleeping, because that state of altered consciousness is extremely hard to ground somebody from. So even when I'm meeting someone at that level, it's open body language. It's very slow, concise, flowing communication. It's almost a rhythmic, so they can expect how my voice is going to come out next. All of my motions are slow and open. My body language is open to them. And you're showing them that you're concerned and compassionate. That's it. You don't want to show them that you're, you know, scared. That's another thing. So yes, make sure we're building that rapport. So the set is very important. Have them prepare that set. You know, Lord of the Rings is a great movie, right? They go to Mordor and they have to throw this ring in there against all odds, against all these demonic, you know, creatures. I know they're orcs, not demons, duh. But what do they do for the whole first movie? Basically, they prepare Frodo's set and his fellowship and what he has going forward into it. So set's important. Then setting. How are we going to get our setting? If you're at a music festival and stuff like that, it's a lot more difficult to control setting. And I think that's, you know, goes without saying. But if someone's going to plan for a trip, see, I always think if you're going to be an effective trip sitter, you want to be able to plan the experience with that person a few weeks, maybe days at least before. If you're happening upon someone at a festival or a stranger or someone who just does it on an impulse, then it's a lot harder, you know, to prepare set and setting. But you can make yourself be the best set and setting you can be. So calm body language and looking for what's in your environment at your disposal to ground the person. So I'm going to share another part here. Where is this? Sorry, I'm getting a little, every time I get the screen share, it throws me off a second. All right, there we go. So we're doing really well here. Again, for the setting part here, I really want to make sure this is conveyed. So you want to collaborate in an ideal location. So make sure it's not just somewhere that's really loud and aggressive and as a party with strangers. As a paramedic, the only times I've ever had to respond to somebody on psychedelics, and it wasn't a laced substance that was dangerous in the psychedelic, was someone at a bad setting. Set and setting is so much behind the experience, even if it's a difficult experience. A safe and comfortable and effective setting can help the person get through the most difficult experiences. So whenever I'm called by ambulance or been called to a psychedelic experience, it's been usually at a house party or a field party or someone in public walking up and down the street on LSD. And they can't tell me how many tabs they did. And I'm like, see, that's not really effective harm reduction. So knowing ahead of time what you're taking and where you're taking it's huge. So what substance is being used and why? Okay, is it psilocybin? Is it MDMA, LSD, peyote, DMT? Do some research on how long it's going to last and what to expect in the mind and body when they're on the substance. How can the environment be made comforting to all the senses, pleasing visuals, grounding scents? So if someone likes certain smells, specialized music playlists the person likes, activities that they enjoy doing when that energy is building up inside of them. Because if you have a lot of energy building inside of you on a psychedelic, that can lead to what's perceived as discomfort. So if you can work the energy out and express it, move around, it helps a lot. Decide on tools and activities to be available for comfort, grounding, and expression. Do they like to draw? Do they like the smell of sage? Do they like essential oils? Do they like to play guitar or something? Find out what makes them comfortable and have them maybe bring with them a safety kit or a comfort kit to the session. I think that's big. Have them do it in a place that they are familiar with and feel comfortable in, whether it's their bedroom sometimes, it could be, or just somewhere that you agree they're comfortable with. Have a first aid kit, water, food, and snacks available. And a lot of that is just in case. They may not touch any of those three things. It's just that those are there to remind them that their needs are met, that first level, the biological needs and the safety needs, those first two needs are met. And if you're thirsty or hungry, they can have something there to meet that need. Environmental and physical boundaries. This is big for being an effective trip sitter. A lot of being an effective trip sitter is planning ahead for the problems that might occur. So to pull back from this screen sharing, because I don't want it to be all PowerPoint, planning ahead is huge. Part of it is like the first question there was asking is how do you make a safety plan for someone who might be at risk? So planning that. So what do I do if you have lost control and you're telling me to call an ambulance? If we get to that point, what is our protocol to make sure I only call it if needed? And they can try everything at all costs not to if you're not dying. Another thing would be, what's our boundaries? Is there a backyard? Is there just a basement we're in? Is it just one room? Make sure you have a bathroom accessible if it's important. Don't make them, go in a bucket somewhere. If you can help it, try to make a bathroom available. Comfort's everything, right? But if they want to have a backyard outdoors available, then make sure you set some boundaries with them that you agree upon ahead of time. Because then when they enter the psychedelic state, you can remind them of the rules that you've come up with. And sometimes it does help that person with being more agreeable towards it. Good. But do not let them just run anywhere they want to go, because sometimes they can get into dangerous situations if they leave your supervision. Make sure they always have someone with them. I've had some patients sometimes from our injection sites come out of an overdose and they're on a high benzo cut in the supply, and they're wandering out into traffic and they can't even control their muscles and they don't know where they're going. And we have to sometimes follow them out and kind of corral them back to safety and make sure they don't go into dangerous environments. So make sure you set up some boundaries physically, and also boundaries for you. What are things you're comfortable engaging with and things you're not, where you might just have to call for help. Another thing I'd say with that is have somebody on standby that can back you up, that you and the person tripping agrees upon, like another friend, or whatever, another resource, that if you feel overwhelmed, you feel safe in knowing there's a safety net to call somebody else. We talked about making the washroom available. Make sure you're both familiar and know your dose, know your source, and know the drug interactions so they know what to expect. So any questions right now so far on this, how to be an effective trip sitter? We talked about ways that you can prepare your mind and body to make sure that you're at your most optimal. We've talked about preparing some of the set or helping coach the person in preparing their mindset, how to build up a setting. You don't have to make it like a perfect shamanic traditional setup, because you shouldn't be doing anything you don't understand. If you don't have any certain cultural training, don't take in different cultural practices that you're not familiar with. That doesn't tend to go very well. Set up your setting and your environment with things that you and the person both agree are going to make them comfortable so that you can use them as needed. Very important to do that. Somewhere where they can lie down too. Make it, it is nice to ask them if they like colorful lights and things like that, but make sure there's an opportunity for them to have silent darkness. So if they feel overwhelmed, they can lie down and immerse themselves in their mind and body. So here's another big trick I'm going to show you. There's different levels of psychedelic experiences that different people know about. Who here has probably taken a psychedelic? Many of you may have, many of you may not have. As a trip sitter, here's a pop quiz, and you can answer or you can choose not to. It could be rhetorical. Do you think the best answer is to somebody trying psychedelics for the first time to go all in with that nice heroic dose or a nice big 3-gram mushroom dose? Or do you think maybe start low and go slow? Does anyone have any opinions on that? And there's a lot of different research actually between the two, so there's no wrong answer there. I'll just explain the nuances of both. Go all in, someone says. Okay, there's one. And there's reasons why that's not a wrong answer. Okay, I already see two completely different ones. This is good. So for the go all in, let's quickly talk about that. If that person's feeling is, I would love to just go all in and do that. Like, that's what I want to do. I'm feeling stable. My needs are met. You know, that hierarchy of needs, use that diagram. They're feeling safe. They're biologically healthy. They're not going through any mental health struggles right now that they're out of control with. You know, they're feeling connected socially and like they're feeling affiliated and belonging in their community. Their self-esteem is good. They're aware of their weaknesses and their strengths. They can have a sense of humor about themselves. They're ready to handle all the truths that come at them, and they want to reach their absolute most optimal. And there's nothing holding them back except maybe just not knowing where they are in life. You know, there's not sure what to do. They just want to explore. That's when maybe going all in could be not a bad thing for them. But the start low and go slow is what I personally will only recommend, because I am a substance use and mental health professional, and that is the safest harm reduction approach. That is the only reason I say that. Now, the go all in, if that's the way you feel, it's not wrong. It just means that if that person says, I want to do it, you're probably the best trip sitter for them, which is a good thing. Maybe that's because you're so comfortable with the experience. That's another thing. A lot of healers and a lot of the medical use of psychedelics, they're going all in, right? They're not just doing step-in doses. When I say start low and go slow, that's for the average person who wants to avoid those losses of control that maybe they're not ready for. Another really good tip here is do not sit with somebody who's on a level of a substance that you're not comfortable with. And it doesn't mean you've had to have been on that exact same level, although that really does help. But just make sure you know what to expect. So the start low and go slow is what I would recommend for most people. But of course, if they want to go all in, just give them the preface that, look, it's going to be a bit of a wild ride. Maybe get them to listen to some Terence McKenna lectures as well. And seeing people go through that experience can be quite distressing. So make sure you're prepared for it. I'm going to do one last little screen share here because I don't want to use any more PowerPoint. But one last, because this is important, we're going to talk about the different levels of a psychedelic experience here to know how to prepare somebody. Going through here. There, hopefully you can all see this. Mild, so above microdosing. So microdosing is very pretty easy going. So if you don't have to really sit with anyone microdosing, although it can bring up some mild discomfort and psychological distress. Microdosing isn't just nothing. Sometimes people do feel a bit uncomfortable on it. But mild doses of psychedelics is where you need to have more than a microdose. So 0.5 gram of mushrooms usually is around there where you get the amount of psilocybin/psilocin needed. LSD about 25 to 75 micrograms. Make sure it's tested if you're using any substance that is not just mushrooms, because there's a chance it's not pure. So here the geometry's changed a little bit. They see the changes to lighting and peripheral vision, just more acute heightening of senses. Also, the visual effects are more color enhancement and sort of different, you can see sort of the patterns a lot more in things. So my keyboard I'm looking at, I would see the keys sort of a lot more stood out in their squared structures of each other. People's faces, you could see a lot more of the different features in their face. The intensity tends to be preferred for first timers. So of course, if you're someone who's trying to use a harm reduction approach, recommending that this might be the first level they try. And this is because if someone's never used a psychedelic and they want to avoid all chances of harm, start with the lowest threshold dose, this one, where they can sort of feel the effects and see how their body feels with it, and they can practice moving through the discomfort. Because then in the higher doses, when they hit discomfort, It's much harder to ground yourself and work through it if you're not prepared. So I think this is a good practice dose or a tester dose for people. Very, very mild or moderate discomfort can come, especially if there's recent trauma they're going through or emotional distress. Um, I've definitely had experiences on the 0.5 end of things there where I've cried really deeply. And that could be just from not processing something that recently happened, or who knows, right? So there's always a chance, but this level. Moderate, threshold dose. This is where they start to maybe have some type of hallucinatory changes. The geometry is actually apparently different now. You might start to see closed-eyed visuals and changes to certain shapes and a sort of distortion of things to be a little different than you'd normally see them. This is where the level reaches more of a recommended intensity for public settings. This is what we agree on a lot in the harm reduction community, because at about a gram or more of mushrooms, or over the 75 towards 100 micrograms of LSD, it's a lot harder for you to assess the way you're being perceived by others. And for everyone listening, I hope you understand what I mean by that. It's hard for me to explain it any other way. But at this level, you might be behaving in ways or doing certain things that you're not aware how others are perceiving them. This is where I've seen people in public where they're laughing hysterically, but they're sitting in the middle of a Starbucks and everyone's looking at them. It's like they don't know. This is the whole part where they might actually, walk into certain areas or start conversations with people that, they're not picking up on the vibes correctly, especially if they're not used to this space. This might be where it starts to become a little more overwhelming and more physical discomfort, emotional distress. But it's easier to stay grounded. So this is a good, beginner psychedelic threshold here, where they're going to maybe have some internal experiences. They close their eyes. They might have very vivid dreams and very vivid movie-like visuals here where they see clips playing. Memory here I find is very easy to recall. There's a very high increased ability to have vivid memories. Strong heavy dose. So this is where you really want to start having a trip sitter. I find at the moderate dose there, it's fine sometimes to not need a trip sitter if you're experienced with psychedelics. I think anytime you're new to them, you should have someone sitting with you just in case. But a strong or heavy dose, definitely don't do this in public unless you have a really good reason. On medium to high doses of psychedelics, you can see there in the brackets, you're going to have a copy of this. This is also available on Arrowhead, a lot of this information. The visual shapes change. Your ability to distinguish reality from non-reality becomes a lot more hard. And this is where people might call an ambulance on you because you're behaving so weird. Not that you're doing anything wrong or that you're dangerous, but that you're behaving in a way that people who aren't used to psychedelics might think you're really strange. And if you're in the wrong neighborhood, certain people don't like people acting weird. But then again, if you're with a trip sitter, this is the part where you really want to be in control. You want to be able to be calm, comforting. There's a higher potential of difficult experience because at this level, the default mode network is really quieted down and a lot more of the emotional memories are coming forward. And research has shown here, the amygdala is lighting up. So the reason why psychedelics are much different than antidepressants here and why you don't need a trip sitter for antidepressants as much is that antidepressants, they blunt the emotional processing part of the brain deep down in that part. Whereas psychedelics light up and enhance that part of emotional processing. So they'll pull out an experience that someone has to work through rather than pushing it down and helping them move away from it. So it's very different. So make sure that you are aware. This is the part where that person might say to you, I feel like I'm going to die. I don't feel good. I feel like I'm losing control. I need help, and know how to respond. The heroic dose, we'll call it there. It's not exactly a heroic dose because I don't like the wording, but people call it that. 5 grams of mushrooms or more, or 500 mics of LSD. This is where people can really, without a trip sitter, have issues. Definitely have a trip sitter, or if someone's going to be doing this. And this is where you want to be experienced as a trip sitter, where holding space at this level is all about making the mind and body feel safe and grounded, that person's going to get through this and that they're not going to die. And that they're able to let go, because this is the dose here where they will let go against whether they want to or not. It will force them to let go. So being able to protect their body and the space around them and make them feel comfortable, that is huge if they're going into a dose that's either the strong or heavy one here or that heroic dose level. The perspective of trip sitter, this is where people might look very confused and unresponsive. Obviously, when I'm used to seeing people who are overdosing on fentanyl and such, this is not a big deal to me. When I'm used to seeing people having major seizures, this doesn't trigger me to feel upset or scared or freaked out. I'm able to stay calm during this. But that's another reason why it's important to make sure you're comfortable with seeing somebody in severe distress, because you perceive or showing them that you're comfortable and them being able to feel that is what's going to be able to make them move through it comfortably and actually move through without needing to call in for backup. And at this level, it's more like looking after the person, making sure they have physical safety. If they pass out, roll them in the recovery position. Here's a great breathing tool you can use where they have to sit up straight if they can listen to you and cooperate. And this is something to do with somebody who's starting to enter some difficult territory where they're like, oh, I don't really feel good. I feel like I'm going to, I feel like I'm going to throw up, or, I feel like I'm freaking out. I feel like I'm losing control. This is a very, very good tool to use for that. I'm just going to, I see there's some questions here. I'll jump on in a moment. I'm just going to quickly share this tool. Sitting up straight and relaxing your muscles. Have them do that first. Then have them take a deep breath through their nose as deep as they can, and then slowly let the breath out their mouth until their lungs are empty. And then keep taking deep breaths as deep as they can until they can get to 5 or 7 second breaths, and then have them look around the room and ground themselves with 5 things they can see, 4 things they can feel, 3 things they can hear, 2 things they can smell, and 1 thing they can taste. Have them go through this repeatedly as much as they're able to until they feel more grounded. And that's why it's important to set this up ahead of time to make sure the surroundings and the setting is actually well addressed. Let me see the questions here I may have missed. Dosing with mushrooms. I've heard there can be different strains with different amounts of psilocybin. Oh, this is cool. Okay. Different strains have different potencies. I've also heard that the concentration may differ in the stems. Okay, yes, there is some validity to this stuff. This is important as a trip sitter because you might get asked this when the person is about to take their dose. The caps are proven to have a lot more psilocin, which is the active ingredient, and the stems are a little less potent, but it doesn't mean that that's reliable, because the mushrooms, all of them are created differently in a sense when they're grown. Different parts of the soil, different amounts of sunlight, all that, just like cannabis strains. That's why they recommend for people who want consistency is to take several mushrooms, caps, and stems and to like grind it up. So it's all kind of a consistent powder to put in a tea or whatever. And that also helps people avoid physical discomfort, believe it or not. Putting it in tea gets them through some of that really difficult stomach discomfort. And the feeling of having to have diarrhea, which some people get a lot when they have a lot of mushrooms. But yes, the dosing. Definitely get a scale if people are dosing. I say with any harm reduction advice, with taking any substance, have a scale that works, a calibrated scale. And then yes, make sure they know that yes, the caps will have some more active ingredient in it. And the stems will have a little less. And there's different strains. The cyanescens, I believe, is one of the most potent ones. And the cubensis is the ones that are the most consistent that people like. But you can look up on, I think Arrowwood does have a chart, and you can look up online. There are charts available that show you by species what the psilocybin and psilocin content is. So please look that up. That's also available online. So yeah, just like if somebody takes acid, sometimes if they don't dissolve it in liquid, the tab can have different hot spots, just like fentanyl and things like that do. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on dissociation during trips. Someone not recognizing themselves in the mirror. Woo. Okay, so this is one of those deeper things. So this is why it helps as well to really learn about symbolism, learn about things like psychology, to read about things like, Freud, Jung, whatever heroes you have in the psychology field and sociology field. It's good to really familiarize yourself with these, because a lot of these experts have theories for this and different ideas. And dissociation during trips. One of the biggest things that we forget about is that we are in this sort of body vessel, and our actual self is not in my skin. It's not in my skull, right? Because as the brain shuts off completely, or if people are, dead and there's zero brain activity at all and their heart stopped and they cease to be, the body doesn't just get up and keep moving, because that's where consciousness is. It's deep in that brain. So when people have that default mode network shutting off, this is going to be in the higher doses. You sometimes will see this in psychosis as well. But when that default mode networks are really quiet, and the brain's moving in different areas and different detour routes, they might actually not perceive themselves as themselves, Because that part, there's a certain part, I forget the word, it's one of the cingulate gyruses that's responsible for self, um, and the sense of self. And that actually alters on psychedelics. So coaching the person through that, I'm going to share with you, and this, I know we're a bit over time, but there's a tool called OARS you can use for people going through this exact thing, this dissociation, or any difficult experience that they can't make sense of, or they're feeling like really overwhelmed about, because that's a scary experience for people. The who am I, what's happening to me right now? That's not who I am. And trying to tell somebody they're going to be okay, and that, oh, it's nothing, and oh, it's just the drugs, that doesn't always help. That sometimes can make it worse. So this is actually a very good tool we use in the mental health field. I use it in crisis intervention a lot. Pace yourself, partnership, autonomy, compassion, and evocation. So build partnership with them. Say, we are going to get through this together. I'm on your side. I want to help you through this. Autonomy. You are your own person. You're the one who's going to make the final decisions. It's your body. Compassion. Hey, I care about you as a human being. You know, I'm here for you. I hope for the best for you right now, and really show them that. And then evocation. They will come to their own best conclusion. Then OARS is a very big one. OARS are what you use to get yourself moving through difficult waters. There you go. And you're rowing a boat. Open-ended questions. So ask them about that experience of dissociation. Oh, so they say to you, I don't recognize myself in the mirror. Say, well, who is it? Like, you know, tell me about that feeling. Tell me about who that is in the mirror. You know, affirmations. Well, on psychedelics, it's very normal to lose that sense of self and to not recognize yourself. And then as they talk more about it, open-ended questions are how you get somebody to share with you more. So more about that, you know, anything that doesn't lead to a yes or no answer is an open-ended question. So just encourage them to explore that feeling and talk to you about it if they want, and affirm to them the affirmations that it's normal on psychedelics, that their experience will resolve eventually, and that this is their brain going through the different experiences under the substance. Reflective listening. Repeat to them what they're saying to you and how it's making them feel. Wow, so what you're saying to me is that, you know, you don't recognize yourself in the mirror, and that's very distressing. And you're telling me that it's scary for you. Is that right? And then summarize, you know, everything they've just told you. And that shows that you have understanding. So repeat that to them. And try to give them some sense of control of their body and their immediate surroundings, comfort in their mind and body in relation to set and setting, and connection to those around them, and grounding them is best. Asking them who they see in the mirror sometimes does help. But they sometimes tell people not to look in mirrors on high doses of psychedelics, and they don't usually do that in therapy. So what I would say in that situation is just kind of sit with that person and hold space for them. Don't say anything to try and shut it down or belittle it or silver line it. It's best to kind of just allow them to work through that process and just keep their body safe and show them that it's not overwhelming to you. If you can show them that it's a normal experience in psychedelics, because it is, with how they affect the actual mind and the anterior and posterior cingulate cortexes, that is exactly what happens sometimes. So be calm and comforting. Ask them what would make them comfortable. That's another good thing when someone's going through a distressing experience. Promote feelings of trust and security. Let them work through it and provide support to those distressing thoughts and experiences. Reassure them they're not alone. Keep saying that to them. You're not alone. I'm here with you. You know, tell them who you are again. You know, it's Jake. I'm your friend. Do not distract them from that experience. Allow them to have that experience, because trying to turn them away from it actually distresses people. Don't cast judgment or show contempt or fear about it. Just allow them to feel like it's a normal experience. And try to understand them best they can. Do not dismiss or belittle them. Try to repeat what they're saying and encourage them to discuss their strengths and available supports. And then, of course, people in these states of consciousness are very sensitive to body language. So just try to not make it your emergency. Recognize your triggers and biases going into it, and try to like help them resolve and work through that fear, confusion, and hopelessness, because that's what they're feeling. Frequency of use. This is a really good one. Any harms of doing mushrooms every day for a week straight or longer? Should folks take breaks, stay under a certain amount of microdose safely? Okay, great. I think in harm reduction across any substance, even when it comes to caffeine and sleeping pills and things, it's nice to take breaks. Not only to reset tolerance, but just to give your body a chance to have homeostasis. Our nervous system is trying its best, its absolute best, to adapt to our different challenges and environments. But yeah, with psilocybin, a lot of the research has shown that mostly what will happen is tolerance will go up. Now, there have been, at certain doses, you might actually have issues with staying grounded. And I've actually seen this quite a bit in a friend of mine, a couple of friends of mine, to be honest, that thought, oh, I'll take like a gram every day for like a couple weeks. And, a few days into that, they have certain obligations that come up that they're not aware of. And that's something that we really have to be careful of. Microdosing, there's a lot of research showing that microdosing has very little harms, but there's a lot of data out there, and I encourage you not to just take one person's word for it. Look at the research. James Fadiman has a regimen he recommends of like, I think it's 3 days on, 4 off, 4 on, 3 off, something like that. So I think to get the most out of any substance, even cannabis, and I'm someone who actually, like I use cannabis quite frequently. I'm prescribed it for depression and post-traumatic stress and various methods of use. There's some oil in this coffee. But the idea is I take tolerance breaks and I try to use low THC a lot of the time. So if you are somebody who is using any substance or psychedelic, the reason we want to take breaks is not just because we want our body not to depend on it, but also we want to use that work and integrate it. The final part of being an effective trip sitter is helping that person come back into their life narrative and integrate what they've learned and experienced into improving their life. So the breaks are where you integrate. So if I microdose and then I go into work, I want to be able to take the lessons I've learned and apply them in real time. And microdosing has shown to have sustained benefits. So I think overusing microdosing will take away your ability to have really good effect from it. There are some people who enjoy taking them every day. That's fine. But most people I know, especially the ones who get the most benefits, take a few days off once in a while. So it's a great question there. Yeah, we've worked through a lot of the main parts of it. There's a lot in the PDF to go through, and definitely an hour is not enough. But there are a lot of tools I hope you can get in it. I think calling 911 is a big thing I want you to know about. I think this is big before we do end anything. When people have to call 911 as a trip sitter, that's a scary situation if you don't know what to expect. Has anyone called 911 before for a psychedelic experience or somebody going through a psychedelic experience? Anyone in here? Like, it doesn't have to be for you, and it doesn't have to be you outing yourself or anyone. Just have you or someone you know had to call an ambulance or 911? Because what happens a lot at our safe injection sites is we don't need to call ambulances, even for major overdoses that respond to oxygen or Narcan and people stabilize. We don't need to call 911, but sometimes we do. Sometimes we do come across a stabbing, a shooting, a medical problem, or a really bad overdose that doesn't respond, and we have to call 911. But when you call 911, especially for a drug-related issue, is it just the paramedics that show up? Not always. Sometimes the police come, and in fact, that's actually the protocol. The protocol is that police will show up with paramedics to things like overdoses, to assaults, to people having, and this actually is terrible, but like anytime it comes in as a psychological emergency, the police might come. Let me see here. I've seen it happen at a conference. It was not a good outcome. Person was tripping to their underwear in the hotel lobby, and we were in America and they were visiting from Mexico. Yeah. So that's a big one right there. When 911 arrives, if it's just paramedics and the paramedics are comfortable with it, or a crisis team, because you can call mobile crisis teams, they might come and be able to handle it very well if they're comfortable with the situation. But if they're not, they might call for police, or they might handle it very inappropriately and aggressively, trying to take control. When I was a paramedic, I loved these calls. I loved getting called to someone in distress, not because I'm happy they're in distress. I wished nobody had to call an ambulance for psychedelics, but knowing that I was the one closest to them, that I got to get there and employ some of these trip sitting methods and get paid to do it in the back of an ambulance. That was great for me. And I enjoyed it because I was comfortable and I knew the person was going to be okay. And I knew I had all the life-saving equipment around me. So that's part of the comfort, right? When someone's going through distress, reminding them that, hey, look, I have the skills to call an ambulance and help you. But yeah, so here's how you do it. So this is big. I actually do have a really good slide for this. There's a Good Samaritan Act, by the way, that does actually protect you when you call an ambulance, so you don't go to jail anymore, or you don't get charged. So at our injection sites, if there's a really bad overdose and we end up having to call an ambulance, we don't say overdose. We say we have a sick person. That's right. Or I say we have somebody who's not breathing. Or I say we have somebody who's unresponsive. If you keep things very basic and to the point, as you can see that the police will not respond. If you say overdose, you say someone's on drugs, you say someone's intoxicated, the police will come. Now, if the person's violent and there's threats to safety, say that to 911. Don't lie about that stuff because you'll put the paramedics in danger, and not paid enough for that. Definitely paid the least of all first responders. So when it comes to threats of violence and safety, be honest about it. But look, if you just need support because you're afraid your friend might be sick or in danger because they might have a medical issue, if someone's unresponsive to voice or painful stimuli, something you can try if you're trained is a trap squeeze or a sternum rub, where you take your knuckles and you grind them as hard as you can to someone's sternum. And if they don't wake up to that and they stay unresponsive and they look really sick, call an ambulance. People who you can't wake up, that's a medical emergency on psychedelics, because psychedelics aren't sedatives. They're not opioids. They're not benzos. So if it's laced with something or they're having an underlying medical problem, and you don't always know what medical problems people have, and they don't always know, you can't wake somebody up and they look really sick, call an ambulance. No harm there. And if someone is on drugs, is a good Samaritan act protecting you now. Traumatic injuries that require medical attention, a broken bone, a head injury, bleeding, or burns that are severe, definitely call an ambulance. And don't be afraid to tell the paramedics when they arrive, yes, this person's on LSD. Yes, they're on mushrooms. But you don't have to say it on 911 on the phone. You do not have to. Just say objectively why you're calling. My friend is very upset and they're feeling sick. You know, that's what you'd say if someone's in crisis. You know, whatever. Difficulty breathing or ineffective breathing. Okay, someone says, I can't catch my breath. I can't breathe. It might be an anxiety attack. So help them work through that if you are trained. And if they have a history of anxiety attacks, try to use the tactics that work for them. But if there's any doubt that there's an actual problem going on with their heart, their lungs, their brain, any other organ that's causing their breathing to be off, call an ambulance. Because paramedics, by the way, just so you know, if you are alert and orientated and you can make proper decisions and you can talk to them coherently, paramedics don't take you to the hospital if they come and check you out. If you're just someone going through a difficult psychedelic experience, but you can still articulate your words properly, you can still call an ambulance for your friend who you are worried about. And if the paramedics say, hey, it's no big deal. Oh, you said they're on mushrooms? Oh, they're probably having a bad trip. A lot of weed calls are like that before legalization, because cannabis was unregulated before it was legalized. So you'd get some dealer weed was really shitty or bad, and some dealer weed was really strong. So we get called the people panicking, and we do their vitals, and we'd be like, you're fine. It's just strong weed. And they'd be like, oh, okay. So the paramedics will only take you to the hospital if you have to. Potential underlying medical problem, that's another time to call. If you think there's a heart condition or anything going on, they're violent or have uncontrolled aggression, or threats to safety of you or others, those are times to call. Here's a good Samaritan act. If you call 911 and you provide first aid to somebody, whether it's an overdose or just a difficult experience or any injury or illness, as long as you use common sense, and this is across Canada, you use common sense, you get consent from the person you're helping, and if they're unconscious, it's implied consent to actually help them, meaning put them in the recovery position. If you have to do CPR, open their airway. No negligence. Do not do anything that may cause harm. See, all this actually applies to being a good trip sitter too, by the way. Stay with your training. Don't do anything you're not trained to do. So don't just, I saw Grey's Anatomy and they did this. Or, oh, this movie I saw, this is a great movie and he hit the guy in the chest. No, nothing you saw in movies. What are you trained in? Do not abandon someone that you've started helping. That's really big. If you call 911, you don't run away. You stay with them and give updates on the phone and follow directions. And then you can no longer be charged, and this is a new one, or arrested for simple drug possession if you call 911. There you go. Even if it's fentanyl or a severely controlled substance that's extremely illicit to the police, as long as you don't have any outstanding warrants, you don't have trafficable amounts on you, and the police aren't actively, looking for you, then they will leave you alone if you stayed with your friend while they're overdosing. That's a new law, and it actually works. At our injection site, we have drugs in the site. It's a sanctioned site for that. But outside the site, if I'm helping somebody and the police and paramedics show up, it used to be they'd be like, oh, well, maybe you're doing fentanyl too. No, now they're just like, okay, whatever. You're just a harm reduction worker helping. That's great. No one's charged here. And even the person at the hospital, they don't usually charge the person. They might throw it in the garbage if they find it in them, like in their belongings and such. in them. Well, people do hoop stuff too when they're going to the hospital. My suggestion is just to be honest that you have it on you and get rid of it. Most paramedics are pretty easygoing with this stuff, and they'll give you the right tips on how to not get in trouble, and what you should and shouldn't bring into the hospital, which is a huge deal. Avoid saying words like overdose, drugs, and intoxicated or psychotic if you do not want police to come. And to avoid the police response, tell the 911 call taker you're with an unconscious person with a medical problem and there's no further information. Just tell the paramedics the truth when they arrive. That's the big part. If someone's unconscious, attempt to wake them up, roll in the recovery position, which there's actually a lot of free pictures online. I got this from firstaidforfree.com of how to do a recovery position. And this keeps their airway open. This keeps them from vomiting into their lungs. And you cover them with a blanket, keep them warm and comfort them. And just call 911 if you can't wake them up or you're not sure what's going on. For opioid overdoses, this will be in the pamphlet you can read as well. And just some final tips on being an effective trip sitter there for anyone will be in the pamphlet. Any questions, there's some resources for you, and also YouTube resources as well. And there's my information. So is there any other questions? I don't want to hold anyone too long, but I don't mind going on a bit longer if people want. Oh, I've heard of folks having benzos on hand in case someone decides they want to end the trip early. Okay. Because it cancels out the effect. So benzos, giving someone a benzo when they're having a crisis on psychedelics sounds great. And okay, look, if that person uses benzos, that's fine. But don't ever give them your prescription or an unknown pill or dose or type they're not taking. Only let them take their prescribed drugs. That's a big one. And I understand it's like, come on, Jake, I thought you were cool. No, it's not about that. You give someone a prescription drug that they're not used to taking. I've seen a lot of people have harms from that. And there's reasons doctors sit with you and prescribe you things, especially benzos. If they're mixed the wrong way or taken with certain medical conditions or low tolerance, you can have poor effects. Once when I was in college, actually, as paramedic school, my paramedic program, in college, my roommate was prescribed something called clonazepam because she was having horrible, horrible anxiety attacks. It's a great medication for that. It'll work. But for her, it was not the right one for her body. I found her lying on her back on her bed, trying to yell for help, but she was just obtunded and couldn't move her muscles, just staring at the ceiling like, oh my God, I can't get up. Not great. And that was after just a 5 milligram dose, which isn't that high for a lot of people. So the idea is, if you're going to give somebody a medication that's not theirs, don't. Only give them their medications. Cannabis is the one that people sometimes think helps. It does. It helps me a lot if I'm going through a difficult experience, but it doesn't help everybody. So I think that's a good way of planning ahead as a good trip sitter is what are some, if there's any medications you like to take or substances like cannabis, whatever, what do you like? And we can have that available. But giving somebody something their first time is grounds for a bit of a disaster sometimes because you just don't know their full history. But that's, if you've done it in the past, I don't want you to kick yourself because we all have the best intentions. But you don't want to give someone a benzo and then they overdose because they're on something else that kind of interacts with it. Yeah, I'm just trying to see if there's anything else that's extremely pertinent to go over. I mean, I didn't want to use the PowerPoint a lot because I think that's very kind of crummy and boring, but some things you can suggest as a trip sitter if someone's having distress, go for a walk with them, do some type of exercise they like to do some stretching or some type of yoga, mindfulness and meditation, maybe have a healthy snack or drink lots of water, have them lie down, take some rest if they'd like to. Deep breathing exercises are good. Play some games with them. If they want to bring some games to the session, that's awesome. Or some activities, play or listen to music together. If they want to create something, help them guide them through a session of creating things, journaling, drawing. If they want to call a friend or family member that is aware of what's going on, that can be great too. Reading, watching TV shows, entertainment. There's a lot of things you can actually suggest for people to do that are having a difficult time, but asking them, what would you like to do is the best way of going about it. Do you want to go outside for a walk? The other thing here, I think people forget about is the reintegration. And I think this will be the part I'll end on because I realize we're 24 minutes over. Integration. And I'm really glad I didn't miss this part because I almost did. To wrap up here, integration is one of the most important parts of a psychedelic experience, because even if a psychedelic experience didn't go well, it felt very distressing. Maybe you had to call an ambulance. Maybe the person was, the come down did not make them feel at peace or resolved. They have distress days later. Integration can be the thing that helps. So we have to reintegrate, and a good trip sitter will help plan ahead of time before the trip what they can do to integrate, coach them through some techniques during it, and then after, checking in with the person for the weeks and months after to see what they're doing. Discuss the experience. So I want to start doing a lot of this. And if you see my information in the back of the PDF, I will be available for more counseling sessions for people who've had a difficult experience and want some integration coaching, and just talk about it, and have some counseling around that. I think there are a lot of counselors available for that now. And hopefully there are some resources that Josh and some of the team can find, or I can even try to find, about some counselors who are willing to do integration counseling. But seeking support from a community, that's great. The CSSDP, there's different psychedelic communities, the Toronto Psychedelic Society I know about in Toronto here. I run the Psychedelic Society of First Responders and Emergency Workers. So if you're a healthcare worker or a first responder that uses psychedelics, that's a community where you can feel safe and destigmatized. Help the person refrain from making major life decisions. That's huge. Some people can really make a mistake with that, where they might try to quit a job or move or end a relationship the day after a big experience. Try to resist, encouraging that, and encourage them to wait and journal about it and think about it and discuss that in depth before they make any big decisions. They should keep a journal and list of their intentions and of growth. What do they want to get out of this? What came up and what did they learn from the experience? Is there a ritual that helps them reintegrate? Does anyone want to share as we leave here any rituals they like to use to reintegrate after a major experience, or integrate some of those powerful psychedelic experiences that we can recommend some of our people we're sitting with? Obviously, you want to encourage professional help and support if needed. Never leave somebody in crisis without help if they're willing to get it. And there's nothing wrong with seeing a professional counselor if, they need it. There's nothing wrong with that, especially if the counselors are comfortable with this. And there's crisis lines you can call if you're really unsure what to do. And plan regular check-ins to connect with that person and see where they are in their journey, and to make sure that they're not lost or feeling disconnected or any worsening symptoms. But yep, generally, it's fairly hard as a trip sitter to make things worse the less you do. So I think being an effective trip sitter is know your limitations, prepare yourself, be a calm, comforting presence, and hold space for that person. Even when I've been there for people who come out of major overdoses, sometimes I just sat with them and let them talk about how they feel. And that makes them feel a lot more grounded and comfortable going forward. So thank you all for being here and listening. This has been a lot of fun. I'm glad that I am exhausted, but it's still, I was able to put something together.
Yeah. Wow. That was great. Thanks a lot, Jake. I might open up people's mics right now. I'll let you unmute yourself. I think you actually already can. In case you want to just say thanks to Jake or ask any final questions. But yeah, that was that was a lot, but it was good. It was good.
I guess it's recorded,
let's
right?
see. Yeah, I recorded it. I think I missed the first 10 minutes of it, but so.
Well, yeah, that's the PDF will be available too, right? So a lot of the slides I reference and more. So that'll be there for people.
Yeah. All right. Thanks to everybody for coming out. This was actually really successful. We didn't know how our first webinar was going to be received, but it looks like we had about almost 20 people in the room here. So I'm happy with that.
One person's great.
Yeah.
20 is 20 times better.
Exactly. Happy 9/20. That's right. Thanks, Heather.
Happy 9/20.
Yeah, so Jake, if it's cool with you, I recorded most of this. I missed the first 10 minutes. Some people were asking about throwing it up on YouTube or our Instagram TV. So if you're okay with that.
Yep, absolutely. I'm very open with this stuff. And
Okay.
you'll see at the bottom of the PDF, like I have some information on how to reach out to me if anyone needed anything further.
Okay. Shane's asking, where can we find the PDF and recording? Recording, I'll upload to, I don't know if you're following our Instagram. It's Sensible Drug Club on Instagram, all one word. We'll be uploading it to our Instagram TV, so our IGTV. There'll be a post on our page, and then the PDF, Jake, that's on your website, right?
I'm gonna put it up on the website tonight, actually. Yep, and I'll share the link with you. I guess I can email it to you, and you can.
Sure, yeah.
Yep, it's free up on there for people to. I think you can download it from the site too. So.
Okay, so your website is Flight of Thoughts. Do you want to just
.blog.
enter it? Yeah.
Yep. Flightofthoughts.blog. Instagram's Jake_Flight of Thoughts, and I do have a podcast called Flight of Thoughts where I talk about a lot of this stuff with guests.
Yeah. So yeah, if you're having trouble finding any of that stuff, just Instagram message either my chapter or the Edmonton chapter. Yeah. Okay, I think we're gonna end it here. So people are trying to. Oh, we got one more chat. Thanks again. Thanks for coming. Okay. Take care, everybody. Thanks for coming.